Bonjour, boys and girls. Today I will show you three games from the Quo Vadis Open Grand Prix Tournament 2025, which was held in Nyeri, Kenya. And fun fact, Quo Vadis is a Latin phrase from, I think, the Bible, which translates to the question, "Where are you going?" which I find kind of interesting. There's also like two movies, one from 1951 and I think a reboot from 2001 with the title Quo Vadis. And if you Google it, the origin of the phrase Quo Vadis is from the Acts of Apostles, a question which Peter asks Jesus after his crucifixion and resurrection. Where are you going? Anyway, so these three games were played in round 2, 3, and 5, respectively, by FIDE master Jadon Simiyu, who at this time was 13 years old. This is only last year, of course. This video is being recorded in 2026, so he has just turned 14 now, and it just shows how talented this kid is. And for the sake of Kenyan chess and for his own sake in the future, I think he will go very far. He's actually quite good. So for those who are unfamiliar with chess titles, you have to reach a certain rating level. Like for the FIDE Master title, I think it's 2100, if I'm not mistaken. And you have to play a bunch of tournaments and reach a certain performance level to get this rating. So think of this, a 13-year-old kid has done something which 90% of chess players in the country who've been playing for over 20 years have been unable to do. And I don't know, I think it's a very good testament to his strength. And in the future, I think he will probably be Kenya's first grandmaster if he continues at the same level. So there's a very funny connection between these three games I'm about to show you, because the three players who Jadon played in these games, of course, he went on to win the tournaments. These three players were all from South Sudan, and two of them were very high rated in South Sudan. I think the last opponent who I'll show you was the highest rated player at this time, and the second highest rated player before him. So uh, they show up at tournaments together. I think Ngong Thong Gong, I think that's his name. I'm very sorry if I mispronounced it, but the highest rated player from South Sudan, he had won like 3 or 4 tournaments before this uh, around the country, like in Kisumu. He won one in Maven's Chess Club, which is one of the top chess clubs in the country. And yeah, so these are not weak opponents, these are very strong opponents. In fact, some of the strongest opponents from this region, some of the strongest players from the region. So if you've been to these big chess tournaments, you would have definitely seen them. They arrive at tournaments together, they warm up together, they come at the same time. So, pause. But yeah, from the outside looking in, you would definitely assume that when they go back to their hotel rooms, they would analyze whatever the games they've played during the day together. So that context should be playing in the back of your mind as we head into the first game I will show you here. This was played in round 3 of the tournament. Ngoni John Thorne, who I believe on the FIDE website is listed as representing Kenya, who is at the time 1836. I think he's much higher rated now, it's like 1900, 2000 or something. And yeah, he had the white pieces against Jadon in round 3, and this is the game. So the game starts with pawn to e4, c5, and f4, which is the starting position of the McDonald attack of the Sicilian defense, and d6, bishop c4, knight c6, and knight f3. This resembles an Italian, apart from the pawn being on f4, of course. But yeah, Sicilian defense, Jadon already showing that he's here to fight. He is not afraid of his admittedly much older opponent. I think he's born in 1999 or something. So knight f6. Of course, age has nothing to do with chess skill. and I have been shown this many times in tournaments when I've played 14-year-old kids who've absolutely played me off the board, and it's demoralizing, to be honest. E5, D takes E5, F takes E5, and knight G4. And on the database I was using, this was highlighted as the first new move in the position because most of the time knight D5 is the move chosen in this position. But yeah, Jadon plays knight G4, E6, pushing the pawn all the way. Bishop takes E6, bishop takes E6, and F takes E6. So already Jadon is up a pawn, but it's a doubled E pawn, and his king is a bit open. So maybe there's chances for Goni to go ahead and attack him on this king side, maybe eventually win back this pawn, etc. So the position looking kind of nice for black, but of course Jadon has a bit more open space to develop his pieces, maybe getting this bishop out eventually because you can't really move this e pawn, and bringing the knight back, maybe even bringing the queen out. Like there's a lot of options, and he has two pieces out compared to Goni's one. So f3, which h3, which is already an inaccuracy, and if I turn on the engineer, you'll see black is already just a bit better, but for the purposes of this video, I will not be using the engine as much. h3, which is considered a inaccuracy, knight back to f6, which is, I believe, the best move. Castles, queen d6, which is an inaccuracy again, and this is why the game will, for the most part, hover around equal until the eventual mistake. So d3, long castle, which is considered a mistake by the engine, but it shows you that Jadon is ready for an attack. He is ready to fight on the board, because typically if both sides castle on opposite sides, like if one side castles on the king side, the other side castles on the queen side, it means that it will be a race to see who gets to whose king first. So long castles, knight a3, trying to develop this knight, which is an inaccuracy, but of course on the board it's much harder to prove than back here with an engine. So e5, bishop e3, and we start to see that Ngoni might be disrespecting his opponent a little bit, because all these inaccuracies one after another. I believe you should, in this position, instead of focusing so much on trying to get your pieces to attack this king, you need to consolidate the position of your own king first before you start trying to develop an attack. So following these inaccuracies, bishop e3, let's turn on this engine. So you see Jadon is already slightly better, but relatively speaking, this is a probably equal position on the board. e6, knight c4, queen d5, and queen to e1, which is a big mistake. See, the evaluation bar was equal or around 0.3, and queen e2 was the best move in this position, trying to get off this file with the rook and queen. Of course, he does the same thing, but this is not as good, because now, as you will see, e5 lands on the board, and the knight has to move. Knight g5, e5, knight g5, bishop back to f2, and pawn takes d3. And now the position starts to crumble for John. Pawn takes h6, attacking the knight. Knight back to f3, and e5 again, and e4 again. Knight to e3, queen takes, and this is a inaccuracy, but not as bad of a mistake as the engine makes it look like. Of course, if he had found the best move, which would have been queen e6, he would have been well, 1 point of advantage is the equivalent of like one pawn up, but he's still better. So queen takes, rook to d1, and queen all the way back to a6. So as you can see, the position is still quite a bit complicated. There's a knight just hanging here, but due to the threat on the queen, he could not take it on that move. And like to illustrate this point, Jadon plays in such a way like he is not afraid of whatever opponent comes in front of him. Like he is going to try to create complications on the board. He's going to try and fight you, whoever you may be, on the board. And rook takes, knight takes, and the knight jumps into e5. So in this position, I don't know. A stronger player might say white seems to look slightly better. I mean, a bit safer king. You know, maybe these pieces are better placed to try and attack. There's a knight here on e5, which might be quite annoying to deal with. So I don't know. In this position, white to me looks a bit better. And bishop d6, and the position is back to equal, of course. Bishop g3, rook e8, and this is the fatal mistake. Okay, after rook e8, which was an inaccuracy, knight 5 to c4 is the best move. I think this one, moving this knight out of the way and attacking this bishop. So I don't know. Queen to c3, which is a blunder, and it's, I think, the only blunder in this game, because all the other moves were just slight inaccuracies and the game might have continued. But after this, the knight gets out, and Jadon, I think, already knows in this position he is completely winning. So knight c6, knight to c4, knight 3 c4, and knight takes e5, which is a bit of an inaccuracy, but this position is way too good to be squandered. And recapturing the knight is a mistake. Bishop should have taken in this position, because there's a lot of dark squared holes around this king here on g1, and by trading off this bishop, okay, from a human perspective, it seems like a mistake to trade off the bishop instead of the knight. So I understand why he might have taken with the knight instead. So knight takes, and he does not even Jadon doesn't even recapture the knight immediately. He attacks the queen first, and a string of mistakes which leads to a completely lost position. In this position, I don't know, this move I thought was very impressive from Jadon. Of course, I'm a much weaker player. I would never have thought to play it, but this is just insane. Queen takes f1 with check, and the move that was played was king h2. But if he had taken the queen, then knight to e3 check would have won back his queen, and he would have been up on exchange with this knight still hanging in the middle of the board. So king g1, let's say, knight takes c2, and the knight cannot move because there is a pin. If you move the knight, bishop takes, and you're down a rook and two pieces. This is completely resigns territory. So, of course, from this position, the game is already lost. Queen takes and king h2, rook takes, and the game ended here, I believe, after rook takes on e5. And that's the first game of 3 games which Jadon played in this tournament. And I don't know, looking at the style which he used here, he's just so tactically sharp. He's very aggressive, and he doesn't seem too scared to play into sharp lines. So queen takes f1 really impressed me. I'm sure many of you who are stronger, around the same level, 2000, maybe even higher rated, would say this is the first move you think of in this position. I mean, it's a tactic that you shouldn't really miss at this level. But to me, I thought it was very impressive. So that was game one. Let's move quickly on to game two. So game two was played in the immediate next round against Gong Thong Gong, who was at the time, I believe, the highest rated South Sudanese player. And at 1900, facing anyone around 2300, 2200 plus might be very daunting, to be honest. But Jadon shows in this game how it's done. So Jadon with white opens with pawn to e4. Gong responds with e5, knight f3, and knight c6, and bishop c4. So this is the starting position of the Italian game. An opening scene in many games at the highest level. And let's see how Jadon plays it. So knight f6, the two knights defense, d3, bishop e7, c3, castles, castles, and d5. So these are standard positions, like thousands and thousands of games have been played in this position, especially at the highest level, at master level. So pawn takes e5, pawn takes d5, knight takes d5, and rook e1, knight g4, bishop g4, knight b to d2, knight b6, and bishop to b5, f6, h3, bishop h5, knight e4, queen d5, and c4, queen d8, bishop takes, pawn takes, knight back to g3, and knight bishop g6. So on the database I was using, it showed this as the starting the position where the first new move was played. So bishop to g6. Of course, the idea is to attack this pawn, which is being attacked twice right now, only being defended once by the queen, so it's in danger of being captured. Of course, it is a backward pawn, so it's a weakness. So Jadon decides to give it up and help probably develop his knight on f3. Knight takes c4. Of course, after pushing this pawn was hanging, and of course, Gong Thong Gong took it, and of course, b3 attacking the knight, knight a3, putting itself in position to be captured. Of course, you don't want to trade a bishop for knight in normal circumstances, but in this position, you are slightly under pressure because you're a bit behind in development. These bishops are quite intimidating the position. You can see on the long diagonals, they're quite good. Like, oh my god, here you see these bishops are quite strong. The queen is on a nice open file, can probably be developed very quickly. These rooks will probably come to these open files, and yeah, black is looking very nice in this position. And I think if you turn on the engine, you'd see, yeah, black is just slightly better, but the position is hovering around 0.1, so it's kind of equal. Anyway, bishop takes, d takes, and bishop b2 to attack this rook and limit its development. Of course, you cannot move the rook away because this bishop would take, so the rook is effectively trapped on this square. So the queen trade is effectively forced. So queen takes, and rook d1, rook takes, and rook takes. So from this position, I think uh, any player at this high of a level would see black is slightly better, if not even winning from a practical perspective. Like, you have the bishop pair, the board is relatively open, the knight's kind of passive, and though material might be equal for the time being, this position looks like it might crumble very soon for white if not played almost perfectly. So f takes e5, rook d7, promoting this rook to a pig, as Agadmata would would say. Uh, this is the first inaccuracy. So up until move 23, they've played an almost perfect game, and the first inaccuracy who you would not expect to come from the stronger player, but so it happens. And c5 is not the best move. Of course, the idea is to start marching this pawn forward, which is already, because it's already a passed pawn, and allow this rook to win this pawn, probably push e4. And generally, since these pawns are quite weak, it's in black's best interest to use them to give white something to think about by pushing them and making him like use his moves to counter these pawns, and probably in the future try and win these queenside pawns, maybe even put the rook behind this one and try and force promotion or force white to give up material to stop the pawn. So e4, knight d2, of course adding pressure to this pawn, which is a logical move, but it allows Gong to go ahead and push that pawn to e3, and if not just to give it away, but to create a weakness for white to defend. So in this position, you can't even take this pawn because you will immediately be losing. Let me see why. Because bishop e5. Let's see. Bishop to e5. Okay. Okay. Bishop e5 is a fork of the rook and the knight. Okay. So e3, knight to f3, knight back to f3, bishop to d4, pawn takes f3, pawn takes e3, bishop takes e3 check, king h2, and rook a8 defending the pawn. So the position is, from an engine perspective, slightly equal, but I don't know, in this position I would definitely prefer to play with black. So knight to e5, trying to activate these knights against those bishops. The board is very open, and with the bishop pair on open board, it's usually quite a big advantage. So you'll see. And bishop to b1, which is a good move, attacking the pawn chain, the base of the pawn chain. And knight h5, king h8, knight f7 check, knight e5, king h8, and the position could end in a draw here, but Gong decides to reject the repetition and plays bishop back to h6. So in this position, they have repeated the moves twice. So I think Jadon would have been happy with a draw in this position. I don't know. He was the one repeating moves, but Gong probably saw that this position can be won, and he is the stronger player, so he should at least try to push for a win. But that might have been the fatal mistake. So king g8, knight e5, bishop h6, and knight g4 going after the bishop. Bishop takes a2, knight takes h6, and g takes h6. So one of the bishops has been eliminated. Like, one bishop and knight have been traded off. And now with this outside pass pawn and the bishop threatening to win this pawn, you would think Gong, who is already up a pawn, is in prime position to win this. But let's see. Knight f6 check, king f8, and rook takes h7. So white is going to win these kingside pawns, and black is going to win this queenside pawn and try to promote his own passed a pawn, as we'll see. So rook d8, which hangs the pawn, but I'm sure it is in the interest of trying to activate this rook, because if it had remained on this a file, it would have been very passive. But that spells the beginning of the end, because if he had to give up that material to avoid getting, of course, if he hadn't moved the rook, he would have lost it because of this tactic here with the rook to h8 check. Okay. Sorry. After winning this pawn, the threat was, of course, to check the king and win this rook. So he couldn't have stayed on the back rank trying to defend that pawn. Okay, so rook d8, and rook takes a7, bishop takes b3, and knight d7 check, king g8, knight takes c5. And effectively, this game should end in a draw. But because Gong decided to decline the repetition, and now Jadon is now the one who is up a pawn, and it's 2-on-1 on the king side. But since the king's already on that side, he has a bishop for the knight, he has a rook for the rook. Like, this game should effectively end in a draw. But let's see. Bishop d5, g4, bishop f7, king g3, rook d5, knight e4, king g7. Okay, black is trying to walk up and meet these pawns as they come and try and stop this knight from causing any complications. So king f4, rook d8, and knight f6, which is a mistake, but really, any mistakes made in this endgame. The only person who was really pushing for a win here is white. So let's see. Knight g3, king f6, and knight f5. So by moving this king forward, black has made a very big mistake. Dare I say a blunder in this position. He should not be moving his king forward. He should just wait for the pawns to advance, because the pawns can't even really come forward at this point, and use this rook to check the king, bother the king, harass the king, and probably just keep the king and bishop where they are, and this game will end probably in a draw. But let's see. King f6 and knight f5, and this pawn is effectively lost now because the king is no longer watching. So rook a6, and in trying to prevent the knight from capturing the pawn, black has effectively given up the game, because now g5 check, g5 check, king f7, g6 check, king f6, and g7, and now the pawn is destined for promotion. You probably have to give away your bishop or your rook to stop the pawn from promoting. So rook g8 trying to hold on h4, rook b8, and sacrificing this rook because the promotion is inevitable. So king takes, knight to h6, rook b4 check, king g5, rook b5 check, and it was in this position after king g6 that Gong Thong Gong resigned, which is kind of ironic because in a tournament at the beginning of the year at KCB Leadership Center, I think, against candidate master Robert McLeGale, Gong Thong Gong was the one who won that game after sacrificing material to promote his pawn, and in this position he has lost to effectively the same kind of tactic, not the same position, but the same kind of tactic after the rook was sacrificed, and this position is basically unsavable. So yeah, that is game 2, and Jadon at this point, I believe, was 3 out of 3, if not 4 out of 3 out of 3, yeah. And let's get into the final game. Okay, so for the final game of this video, it was played in round 5 of this tournament. Uh, so Peter Majur with the black pieces and Jadon with the white pieces. So he's already beaten 2 of the 3 South Sudanese players in this tournament. And yeah, so the first game with the black pieces, the second game with the white pieces, you would imagine they already have an idea of his style. They already know somewhat what he's going to play, and you would imagine Peter is prepared for this game. Let's see. So Jadon with white opens with e4. Peter replies with c5, the Sicilian defense, knight f3, and e6. So the French variation of the Sicilian defense: d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, and knight f6, attacking this pawn. Knight c3 defending, bishop b4, pinning that knight to the king, and bishop d3 defending the pawn again. So d5, e5, taking more space in the center, and knight fd7, queen g4, queen c7, and castles. And already Jadon has a slight advantage. Okay, slight advantage in the sense that it's not completely clear where the advantage lies, but as you can see, he has a lead in development. His pieces are more active, and if Peter decides to castle on this side of the board, he may come under quite a bit of fire. So effectively, the king is forced to stay in the center, at least for the time being. And you may think this pawn is completely hanging, but in this position, if you take this pawn, knight f3, and the best line recommended by the engine is to give up your queen completely. Bishop takes e3, and knight takes e5, and bishop takes e5. Of course, that's not what happened in the game. What happened was queen takes and bishop f4, and it's now as of move 10 that we have a completely new game. Of course, bishop f4 is a bit of an inaccuracy, but from a practical standpoint, none of these moves are terrible, let's say. So h5, attacking the queen, queen f3, and black is slightly better already if he begins an attack on this side of the board, but that's not what happens. Let's see. Queen f3, queen f6, rook f e1, and castles by black. Knight d to b5, getting this knight out of danger. Of course, this entire time, this knight was hanging, but yeah, I'm not sure why didn't Majura not take this knight. I'm not sure, but let's see. So queen f6, rook f e1, castles, knight d to b5, knight a6, and queen takes h5, which completely sacrifices this bishop, but you cannot take because queen h7 would be checkmate. So queen takes, g6, queen g4, queen h8, rook e3, of course trying to bring the rook over and create some sort of an attack. Knight f6, queen g5, and d4, which seems like it's a fork that wins material, but as you'll see, the knight can just take this pawn. So knight takes d4, knight h7 attacking white's queen, and queen h6, queen g7, and queen takes g7 with check, king takes g7, rook h3, and e5, another some seeming fork, but of course the bishop can just take. But in this position, bishop h6, king back to g8, and bishop takes f8, rook takes h3, bishop takes b4, knight takes b4, and knight f3, and knight takes d3. So again, Simiyu is left with knights versus a bishop and a knight. So it's two knights versus bishop and knight. And in most endgames, I believe a bishop is likely a better piece than a knight, much better than a knight, but we'll see. So bishop f5, knight takes e5, and Jadon is up 2 pawns. But of course, Peter will win back his pawn here, which is on d3. Knight f3, bishop takes d3, and rook d1, bishop c4, rook d7, b6, rook c7 attacking black's bishop, bishop f7 defending, rook a3, a6, h3, b5, knight e4. White is doing much better because of his extra pawn, and in this endgame, of course, with an extra point of material, you would expect white to win this. You can see it's 3 versus 2 on the king side and 2 versus 2 on the queen side. So as long as these pawns get traded off for each other and these pawns push, white has very good chances of winning. So bishop to d5, knight e to d2, rook d8, and king f1, trying to activate the king. Of course, in all endgames, you should try and get your king to the center of the board as quickly as possible. Knight to f8 and rook a7, going after black's pawns on the queen side. So already we can see the makings of another Jadon Simi win, and this would be quite, I don't want to say embarrassing, but embarrassing to these three South Sudanese giants, losing to a 13-year-old Kenyan kid who, by all accounts, is, compared to them, inexperienced. But okay, let's see. King e2, knight to e6, g3, knight c5, and rook c7. Rook e6, check, attacking white's king. King f1, knight to d3, and h3. So you can see black's plan is, when he's down material, of course, it's advice that's given by strong players. When you're down material, you should try and attack the opponent's king, because at the end of the day, if the game gets to an end game and all these pieces get traded off, white is the one who's going to win because he's already up a pawn. So bishop to c6, rook c8, king f7, and rook d8. So Jadon's doing a very good job keeping his pieces active and advancing his pawns at the right time. And it's only a matter of time until the shoe drops. So knight e5, knight d4, declining the trade of also forking uh, black's bishop and rook, and rook e7, which is a mistake because f4 and knight d3, and the, of course, the rook e7 was a mistake because once I kick away this knight, you will lose this bishop for free. So knight d3 and knight takes e6, rook e1 check, rook e2 check, and he wins back his piece. Okay, but then king to e3 forks the rook in the knight, but then rook c2, of course, and attacking this rook, rook g2, king takes d3, and rook takes g3 with check. So Jadon is up a piece and should be winning this game, of course, comfortably. King e4, a5, rook b8, a4, rook takes b5, rook takes h3, rook b7, king e8, b takes a4. So the plan is simple: advance these pawns and promote to a queen, or trade off the rooks, win black's pawns, take away all this counterplay, and white is comfortably winning in this position. So rook takes a3, rook a7, g5, trying to create some complications. Of course, Peter is going to fight. You never know what will happen. g4, knight b5, rook b3, and king d5, completely ignoring the threat on the. No. Okay, the knight is defended by the pawn. So bringing the king forward to try and help this pawn advance. Rook e3 and rook g7, trying to watch this pawn so that it doesn't eventually promote. g3, a5, king f8, attacking the rook, rook g6, king f7, a6, rook f3, king c6, rook takes f5, rook takes g3, rook h5, and rook g7 check, which of course gives away all of white's advantage. But I think in this position, Peter only had like 6 seconds. So after rook g7 check, Peter Major lost on time. So another victory for Jadon Simiyu, and he went on to win with a score of like 7.5, if not 8.5 out of 9. he completely destroyed all three of his South Sudanese opponents, and it's it's so funny. Like, you had two games which you analyzed and saw his style of play, and he still came and destroyed you again, like a third time. Of course, there were three different players and three different strengths, of course, but I don't know. I just thought it was funny, and I would like to also wish Jadon the best. He's extremely strong and extremely talented, and I definitely hope to see that Kenya gets his first Grandmaster in the near future. So, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.